Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. In the heart of Nebraska, where the fields stretch endlessly under the wide, open sky, my husband Charles and I had built a life together. Married for 3 years, our love, like the rolling plains around us, was steady and unchanging. We were each other's first and only, a testament to a love story that began with shy glances and hesitant smiles. It was an August morning, the air still tinged with the smoke of July 4th fireworks, when I first felt it. A subtle change, a whisper in my body that spoke of a new life burgeoning within me. I remember standing in our modest kitchen, sunlight spilling across the checkered floor, my hand instinctively resting on my abdomen. Could it be? I murmured to myself, a mix of wonder and apprehension in my voice. Charles, I called out, my voice echoing through the corridors of our cozy home. He appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern at my tone. I think I might be pregnant, I said, the words both a confession and a revelation. His reaction was immediate, a broad smile breaking across his face, his eyes lighting up with unspoken dreams of fatherhood. That's wonderful, he exclaimed, pulling me into a warm embrace. But beneath my smile, a seed of uncertainty took root. With my newfound condition, I became increasingly aware of my body and its needs. The desire for a natural approach to my pregnancy led me to the local clinic, a quaint establishment that stood at the edge of town, its wooden sign swaying gently in the summer breeze. The clinic was a sanctuary of calm, its walls adorned with hanging plants and the soothing scent of lavender in the air. It was there I met Dr. Ethan Gray, a man whose youth was belied by the wisdom in his eyes. His office was a reflection of his approach to medicine, a blend of modern and traditional, with herbs lining the shelves and medical certificates hanging alongside paintings of rolling landscapes. Mrs. Thompson, please, come in, he greeted, his voice a gentle timbre that immediately put me at ease. As I sat across from him, detailing my pregnancy and my hopes for a natural journey through it, I couldn't help but notice the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his gaze often lingered a moment too long. In one of our conversations, I couldn't help but probe a little. You seem new to this? I ventured, watching his reaction closely. He chuckled, a sound that seemed to dance around the room. Well, I suppose you could say that. I'm more accustomed to the tranquility of herbs and plants than the unpredictability of human emotions, he confessed, a sheepish smile on his face. As our appointments became more frequent, a strange and compelling tension began to build between us. His office became a place of refuge, a place where I could share my fears and hopes without judgment. Ethan listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way that I hadn't realized I was missing. One day, as autumn leaves began to paint the town in shades of orange and red, I found myself alone in his office. The air was heavy with unspoken words, a current of electricity that seemed to hum between us. Ethan, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something unknown, something frightening. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. Sometimes, the most frightening paths lead to the most beautiful destinations, he said softly, his hand reaching out to gently clasp mine. In that moment, in the quiet of his office, with the world outside oblivious to the storm brewing within me, I realized the unsettling truth. My heart, loyal and true to Charles, was now dangerously entwined with another. The realization hit me like a wave, leaving me breathless and disoriented. Ethan, I began, but the words trailed off, lost in a sea of emotions that I couldn't quite comprehend. All I knew was that I was standing at a crossroads, each path leading me further away from the life I had always known. The Nebraska plains, once a symbol of my straightforward, predictable life, now felt like a vast canvas of secrets and unspoken desires. My heart, caught in a tempest of emotions, found itself increasingly drawn to Dr. Ethan Gray. Charles, my devoted husband, remained unaware of the storm brewing within me. Each visit to Ethan's clinic became a step further into a world of forbidden excitement. The air between us was charged with an electric tension, a dance of words and glances that spoke volumes more than our conversations about my pregnancy. One crisp autumn day, I found myself at the clinic under the pretense of a routine checkup. Ethan's office was a cocoon of warmth against the chill outside, the golden leaves outside the window a stark contrast to the sterile interior. Ethan, I started, my voice barely above a whisper as I closed the door behind me. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, and I don't know how to get down. He stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and approached me. "We're both adults here," he said, his voice steady yet revealing a hint of the same turmoil I felt. "We know what this is, don't we?" His proximity was overwhelming, and I found myself lost in the depth of his eyes. "But I'm married, Ethan." "To Charles," I uttered, the words feeling like a betrayal even as they left my lips. "And yet, here we are," he replied, his voice a soft caress that seemed to echo in the silence of the room. It was during one of those clandestine visits, under the guise of discussing natural remedies for pregnancy, that our affair took a tangible form. The clinic had closed for the day, the hallways empty and echoing with the ghosts of hushed conversations. Ethan and I sat in his office, the setting sun casting long shadows across the room. Our conversation, usually a careful dance around our unspoken attraction, took a turn into uncharted territory. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about you," I confessed, the words spilling out of me like a river breaking its banks. "It's like you've awakened something in me that I didn't even know existed." He reached across his desk, his hand gently touching mine. "I feel the same," he whispered. "I've tried to fight it, but it's useless. You're all I think about, day and night." The confession shattered the last of my reservations. In a moment of reckless abandon, I stood up and walked around the desk to him. Our eyes locked, and without a word, we both knew what was about to happen. Ethan stood up, his arms enveloping me in a gentle yet firm embrace. Our lips met in a kiss that was both a beginning and an end, the start of our affair and the end of the life I had known. The kiss deepened, fueled by weeks of restrained desire and unspoken yearnings. As we broke apart, breathless and dazed, the reality of what we had just done began to sink in. "What have we done?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "We've crossed a line," Ethan replied, his voice laced with a similar concoction of emotions. "But I don't regret it." "Do you?" I shook my head, unable to voice the whirlwind of feelings that engulfed me. Regret, guilt, excitement, and fear melded into a confusing tapestry of emotions. "We need to be careful," Ethan said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "No one can know about this. It's too complicated." "I know," I agreed, the weight of our secret already pressing heavily on my shoulders. "We'll keep this between us. Just us." As I left the clinic that day, the setting sun casting long shadows across the empty streets, I felt like I was stepping into a new world. A world where right and wrong blurred into shades of gray, where the thrill of the forbidden mingled with the fear of discovery. My drive home was a blur, my mind replaying every moment of that evening in vivid detail. The touch of Ethan's lips, the warmth of his embrace, the dangerous thrill of our secret, it was all-consuming. I arrived home to find Charles waiting, his face a picture of domestic contentment. "How was your appointment, dear?" he asked, his voice filled with the innocent concern of a loving husband. "It was fine," I managed to say, forcing a smile onto my face. As I embraced him, I couldn't help but feel like an imposter in my own life. That night, as I lay in bed beside Charles, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet room, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, Ethan's face appearing every time I closed my eyes. The affair with Ethan, a secret kept under lock and key, continued to evolve. We met in stolen moments, each encounter a mix of passion and paranoia. The fear of being discovered was ever present, adding a dangerous edge to our rendezvous. Our conversations, once centered around my pregnancy and natural remedies, now danced around our shared secret. We spoke in hushed tones, our words laced with double meanings and hidden desires. "I feel like I'm living a double life," I confessed to Ethan during one of our secret meetings. "It's exhilarating and terrifying at the same time." He nodded, his expression one of understanding and shared guilt. "I know," he said, his hand reaching out to caress my face. "But I can't imagine not seeing you. You've become a part of me." As the weeks turned into months, the affair continued to consume me. It was a constant presence in my life, a secret that both thrilled and tormented me. Charles, oblivious to the storm raging within me, remained the ever-doting husband. He supported me through my pregnancy, his excitement for our future child growing with each passing day. But as my belly grew, so did my guilt. The knowledge of what I was doing to Charles, to our marriage, weighed heavily on my heart. I found myself torn between two worlds, the stable, loving life I had built with Charles and the passionate, illicit world I shared with Ethan. The affair with Ethan was like a drug, addictive and dangerous. It clouded my judgment, making me blind to the consequences of our actions. Each stolen kiss, each secret embrace, pulled me further away from the life I had known. But deep down, I knew that this couldn't last forever. The truth had a way of coming out, and when it did, it would shatter everything. My marriage, my family, my reputation, everything was at risk. As I lay in bed each night, the reality of my situation pressed down on me like a physical weight. I knew I had to make a choice, to choose a path before it was chosen for me. But with each passing day, that choice became harder and harder to make. The affair with Ethan was a whirlwind of emotions, a hurricane that threatened to destroy everything in its path. And I, caught in the eye of the storm, was powerless to stop it. The autumn leaves in Nebraska had turned from gold to brown, mirroring the deepening complexity of my life. Caught between the steadfast love of Charles and the tempestuous passion for Ethan, I felt like a leaf caught in an unrelenting wind. As my pregnancy progressed, so did the intensity of my affair with Ethan. Our stolen moments were filled with whispered promises and fervent embraces, each one a step further away from the life I had with Charles. Yet, with each passionate encounter, a gnawing sense of guilt and confusion grew within me. One chilly evening, as I sat alone in the living room waiting for Charles to return from work, the walls of our home felt like they were closing in on me. My thoughts were a turbulent river, swirling with images of Ethan and the life I was deceitfully leading. When Charles finally walked through the door, his face lit up with the joy of impending fatherhood. "How are my two favorite people doing tonight?" he asked cheerfully, bending down to kiss my forehead. I forced a smile, but inside I was crumbling. "We're fine, Charles," I managed to say, my voice barely hiding the turmoil within. As we sat down for dinner, the normalcy of our routine felt like a farce. Charles talked about his day, his plans for the baby's room, and all I could do was nod and pretend to be present. The weight of my secret was like a stone in my stomach, growing heavier with each passing moment. Later that night, as I lay awake in bed next to Charles, his steady breathing a stark contrast to my restless mind, I knew I had to confront the reality of my situation. I slipped out of bed and wandered to the kitchen, seeking solace in the moonlit silence. As I sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought, my phone vibrated softly. It was a text from Ethan. "I need to see you. Can we meet tomorrow?" The message was like a lifeline, pulling me back into the whirlwind of our affair. I quickly typed a response, agreeing to meet him, my heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The next day, I found myself at the familiar clinic, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for Ethan. When he finally arrived, his face was a mask of urgency and desire. "Ethan, what are we doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This can't go on forever. We're living a lie." He took my hands in his eyes searching mine. "I know, but I can't help it. I can't stay away from you," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But what about Charles? My marriage? Our baby?" I countered, the reality of my actions hitting me like a wave. Ethan's expression softened, and he pulled me into an embrace. "I don't have the answers, but I know I can't lose you." "You mean everything to me," he whispered, his words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. As we held each other, the complexity of our situation became painfully clear. We were trapped in a web of our own making, each thread a lie that bound us together. Over the following weeks, the struggle within me intensified. My days were a balancing act, trying to maintain the facade of a happy marriage while secretly yearning for my moments with Ethan. The weight of my duplicity began to take its toll. I found myself growing more distant from Charles, each interaction laced with guilt and deception. My nights were restless, filled with dreams of a life that could never be. One evening, as Charles and I sat in the living room, he looked at me with concern. "Is everything all right?" "You've been so distant lately," he asked, his voice filled with genuine worry. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man who had been my rock, and felt a surge of emotion. "I'm just tired, Charles. The pregnancy is taking its toll," I lied, hating myself for the deceit. As the days passed, the guilt became a constant companion, whispering in my ear and clouding my thoughts. I knew I couldn't continue living this lie, but the thought of hurting Charles, of destroying the life we had built, was unbearable. The turning point came one cold November morning. As I sat in Ethan's office, the reality of my situation finally hit me. "Ethan, we can't do this anymore. We're hurting too many people, including ourselves," I said, my voice a mixture of resolve and sadness. Ethan looked at me, his face a mask of pain and confusion. "But I love you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I love you too. But this isn't right. We have to end this, for everyone's sake," I replied, feeling a sense of finality in my words. As I walked out of the clinic that day, the cold air felt like a balm to my troubled soul. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with heartache and tough decisions. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity. The affair with Ethan had been a tumultuous struggle, a journey through a landscape of passion and guilt. But now, as I faced the reality of my actions, I knew it was time to confront the consequences and find a way to move forward. The chill of the Nebraska winter mirrored the cold dread that had settled in my heart. The secret of my affair with Ethan, once a source of exhilarating escape, had become a shackle of guilt and fear. I had ended things with Ethan, but the aftermath was a landscape I wasn't prepared to navigate. Charles, ever attentive, had started to notice the change in me. The distance I put between us was like a silent alarm, ringing in the quiet moments we shared. His gentle inquiries about my well-being were like pinpricks to my conscience. One evening, as we sat in the dim glow of our living room, the weight of my secret finally became too much to bear. Charles looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and confusion. "Is everything okay, love? You've seemed so distant lately," he asked, reaching out to hold my hand. I looked at his hand, strong and steady, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. "Charles, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice a trembling whisper. He leaned forward, his expression changing to one of apprehension. "What is it?" "You can tell me anything," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. Taking a deep breath, I let the words spill out. I had an affair with Ethan, the doctor from the clinic. The confession hung in the air like a thick fog, obscuring everything we had built together. Charles recoiled as if struck, his face draining of color. "An affair," he echoed, his voice barely a whisper. The pain in his eyes was a physical force, cutting through me. "I'm so sorry, Charles. I never meant for any of this to happen," I said, tears streaming down my face. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "How could you do this to us? To our family?" His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I tried to reach out to him, but he stepped back, putting distance between us. "I thought we were happy. I thought we were building a life together," he said, his voice breaking. I was confused, lost. "I don't know how it happened, but it did, and I regret it every single day," I replied, my own voice breaking under the weight of my guilt. Charles turned away, his shoulders heaving with silent sobs. The sound tore through me, a stark reminder of the pain I had caused. He finally spoke, his voice hollow. "I need some time to think, to process this." The days that followed were a blur of silence and tension. Charles moved into the guest room, and our home became a maze of unspoken words and avoided glances. The air was thick with the unsaid, every interaction a reminder of the betrayal that had torn us apart. I spent my days in a fog of regret, each moment with Charles a painful reminder of what I had lost. My nights were restless, filled with dreams of a different life, one where I hadn't made the choices that led me here. As the reality of my situation settled in, I realized the magnitude of what I had done. My affair with Ethan wasn't just a betrayal of Charles, it was a betrayal of myself, of the person I thought I was. One evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, the silence of the house a heavy cloak around me, I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions. I picked up my phone and dialed Ethan's number, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "Ethan, it's me," I said when he answered, my voice steady despite the chaos within. "Are you okay? What happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "I told Charles about us. I couldn't keep living a lie," I replied, feeling a sense of finality in my words. There was a pause on the other end, and then Ethan said, "I understand. How's he taking it?" "Not well," I said, my voice breaking. "I've destroyed everything, Ethan. Our family, our life together. I don't know how to fix this." Ethan was silent for a moment before replying, "I'm here for you, whatever you need." But his words, once a source of comfort, now felt hollow. I had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the fallout was mine to bear alone. As I hung up the phone, the weight of my decisions settled heavily on my shoulders. I had embarked on a path that had led me here, to a place of broken promises and shattered dreams. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between Charles and me grew wider. Our home, once filled with laughter and love, was now a silent testament to the fallout of my actions. I watched as Charles struggled with the betrayal, his pain a constant reminder of the harm I had caused. I wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the gap that had grown between us, but I didn't know how. One cold December morning, as I sat at the kitchen table, the reality of my situation hit me like a wave. I was about to bring a child into a broken home, a home shattered by my actions. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of my decisions crashed down on me. I had thought I could have it all, but in the end, I was left with nothing but regret and a future filled with uncertainty. The fallout of my affair with Ethan was more than just the end of my marriage. It was the end of the life I had known. And as I sat alone in the silence of my kitchen, I knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But it was a road I had to walk, a path I had to take to find redemption and hope in the aftermath of my choices. The frigid Nebraska winter blanketed the world outside in a sheet of white, mirroring the cold desolation in my heart. The revelation of my affair with Ethan had left my life in ruins, the once solid foundation of my marriage to Charles now cracked and unstable. The path to resolution was unclear, shrouded in the frost of uncertainty and regret. Charles and I lived like strangers under the same roof, our interactions limited to necessary exchanges, each word heavy with the weight of unspoken pain. The air was thick with the ghost of our past happiness, now just a distant memory. One morning, as I watched the snowflakes gently fall outside the kitchen window, Charles walked in, his face a mask of stoic composure. "We need to talk about the future," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. I nodded, my heart sinking. "Yes, we do," I replied, bracing myself for the conversation I had been dreading. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes not meeting mine. "I've been thinking a lot," he started, his voice steady but distant. "About us, about the baby, about what comes next. I know I've hurt you, Charles, more than I can ever express. And I understand if you can't forgive me," I said, the words laced with sorrow and remorse. He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "It's not just about forgiveness. It's about trust, about what we want for our future, for our child's future." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What are you saying, Charles?" "I think it would be best for both of us, and for the baby, if we go our separate ways," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes reflecting the pain of his decision. The words hit me like a physical blow. The finality of it was overwhelming, the end of our life together now a stark reality. "I understand," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "We'll need to figure out the details, the divorce, custody arrangements," he continued, his voice clinical, detached. I nodded, fighting back tears. "I want what's best for the baby, Charles. Whatever you think is right." He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'll contact a lawyer, start the process. We can discuss the details later." As he left the room, I was left alone with my thoughts, the future a daunting expanse of unknowns and challenges. The path to resolution was going to be a difficult one, but it was a path I had to walk, for the sake of my child. In the days that followed, Charles and I navigated the awkward dance of cohabitation while preparing for our separation. We spoke little, each conversation a delicate balancing act of civility and underlying hurt. I spent my days in a daze, the reality of my impending divorce and the responsibilities of motherhood looming over me. The once joyful anticipation of my child's arrival was now tinged with sadness and regret. One afternoon, as I sat in the nursery, surrounded by half-assembled baby furniture, Charles walked in. "I've spoken to a lawyer," he said, his voice neutral. "He'll be in touch with the details." "Thank you," I replied, my voice hollow. "And what about us? After the divorce?" He looked around the nursery, his gaze lingering on the crib. "We'll figure it out. We'll do what's best for the baby." The finality in his voice was a clear sign that our paths were diverging, our shared journey coming to an end. The future was a blank canvas, filled with uncertainty and the daunting task of rebuilding my life. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of my situation began to sink in. The divorce proceedings were underway, a slow and painful unraveling of the life we had built together. Charles and I became like two ships passing in the night, our interactions brief and functional, the chasm between us growing wider with each passing day. I found solace in preparing for my child's arrival, channeling my energy into creating a welcoming space in the midst of the chaos of my life. The nursery became my refuge, a place of hope and new beginnings amidst the ruins of my past mistakes. As my due date approached, the weight of impending motherhood settled on me, a mix of excitement and fear. I was about to embark on a journey of a lifetime, a journey I would largely navigate alone. The day I went into labor, a cold February morning, the world outside was blanketed in snow, a silent witness to the turning of a new chapter in my life. Charles drove me to the hospital, the car ride a quiet journey filled with unspoken emotions. At the hospital, as I lay in the delivery room, the pain of labor a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil within me. Charles was there, a silent support in the background. Despite everything, he was there for the birth of our child, a testament to the love that once bound us together. When our child, a beautiful baby girl, was finally born, the world seemed to pause for a moment. Holding her in my arms, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness, a fierce determination to give her the best life possible. Charles stood by my side, looking at our daughter with a mix of awe and sadness. She's beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She is, I replied, tears streaming down my face, not just from the pain and exhaustion of labor, but from the realization of the enormity of the responsibility I now held in my arms. As I looked at our daughter, I knew that the path to resolution would be a long and challenging one. The first light of dawn crept through the hospital room window, casting a gentle glow on the tiny, sleeping form of my daughter. Wrapped in a soft blanket, her tiny fingers curled into fists, she was a beacon of innocence and hope amidst the turmoil of my life. Charles had left shortly after her birth, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the overwhelming reality of motherhood. As I sat there, watching her sleep, the events of the past months played in my mind like a movie on loop. The joyous early days of my marriage with Charles, the illicit thrill of my affair with Ethan, the painful revelation, and the slow, inexorable march towards divorce. Each scene was etched in my memory, a reminder of the choices I had made and the path I had walked. The door to my room opened softly, and a nurse walked in, her smile warm and comforting. "How are we doing this morning?" she asked, checking the monitors and glancing at my daughter. "We're doing well, thank you," I replied, my voice a whisper. "She's a beautiful baby," the nurse said, her eyes softening as she looked at her. "You must be very proud." I nodded, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and fear. "I am. She's my world now." The nurse left, and I was alone again with my daughter. I reached out and gently touched her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. In that moment, I made a silent promise to her, to be the best mother I could be, to protect her and guide her through life's challenges. The days in the hospital passed in a blur of feedings, checkups, and sleepless nights. My emotions were a whirlwind of joy, anxiety, and reflection. I thought about Charles and the life we could have had, about Ethan and the passionate, reckless path we had walked. I thought about the future, about raising my daughter alone in a world that seemed both vast and intimidating. The day of our discharge from the hospital arrived, and I packed our things with a sense of trepidation. As I held my daughter in my arms, ready to step out into the world, I felt a sudden wave of panic. "Am I ready for this?" I whispered to myself. "You'll do just fine," a voice said behind me. I turned to see the nurse, her smile reassuring. "You're stronger than you think." With her words echoing in my ears, I walked out of the hospital, the cold air hitting me like a splash of reality. I carefully placed my daughter in the car seat, took a deep breath, and drove home. Home was different now. It was no longer the place I shared with Charles, but a sanctuary for me and my daughter. The walls that once echoed with the laughter and arguments of a marriage were now silent, waiting to be filled with new memories. As I settled into a routine with my daughter, the days began to take on a rhythm of their own. Feedings, diaper changes, and naps were interspersed with moments of quiet reflection. I often found myself gazing at her, wondering about the person she would become, about the world she would grow up in. One day, as I sat in the nursery, feeding her, the phone rang. It was Charles. "How are you?" "How's the baby?" he asked, his voice tentative. "We're doing well," I replied, surprised by the calmness of my own voice. "I've been thinking about you, about her. I want to be a part of her life, if you'll let me," he said, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. I paused, considering his words. "I want that too, Charles. She needs her father." We talked about visitation, about co-parenting, about finding a way to move forward for the sake of our daughter. The conversation was awkward but necessary, a step towards a new kind of relationship. As the weeks turned into months, life settled into a new normal. I watched my daughter grow, her milestones a series of joys and challenges. Charles was a constant presence, a supportive co-parent, and slowly, the sharp edges of our past began to soften. One afternoon, as I sat in the park watching my daughter play, I realized that the path to resolution was not a destination but a journey. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, about learning from the past, and about moving forward with hope. The sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the playground. My daughter laughed, her voice a melody that filled the air. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, I would face it with courage and love. As I packed up our things, ready to head home, I looked back at the playground, at the fading light and the memories we had made. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was ours to walk, one step at a time.